you. And good morning. Yes, buenos dias. But good afternoon, good evening to, I think, most of the people listening. Uh, for the next little while, we are going to be looking at business agility and how it is that you, as organizations or individuals within organizations, can measure the uncertain. Now, ultimately, when we talk about business agility, we're talking around how organizations change behaviors. So we're going to be talking about how do you measure behaviors. And I'll actually give you some very specific examples and data that we have. So as was briefly introduced, my name is Evan Laybourne. I am speaking to you from Melbourne, Australia. I am the co-founder of the Business Agility Institute, who is a fiercely independent research and advocacy organization. The operative word in that today is research, because we're going to be talking around data. We're going to be talking about what we've seen in the, let's be honest, thousands of organizations that we have studied or that have been involved in the work that we do. But first, I want to share a little example of what is the challenge, or one of the key challenges that happens in the world of measurements and OKRs in organizations. And I want you to think about your team or your area in your organization. You're busy. Your oars are in the water. You're working really, really hard. You're putting all your energy into achieving the outcomes, the goals that you've been set. And so is everybody else. Everyone is working hard. They're working towards their goals. They're working towards their outcomes. And yet somehow the organization isn't moving anywhere. And we see this very clearly where measures and OKRs are working in conflict with one another. We were doing a profile because we study companies with a British bank earlier in the year. And we were interviewing some of the executives. And I was talking to one executive, and she was talking to me and she said, so for IT to meet their KPIs, they were using KPIs, not OKRs, but for IT to meet their KPIs, I will fail mine. And for me to meet my KPIs, IT is going to have to fail theirs. And then she leaned forward and she said, and I'm not going to fail mine. And it's that conflict, that tension that exists across a lot of organizations that underlies the challenge with how organizations measure themselves. Organizations are complex adaptive systems. Cause and effect are in many cases unpredictable. So this is where we like to talk about business agility and where we like to talk about behavioral change. So let me start with just some basic information so that we all know what I mean when I say business agility. For those of you who have not come across the term or have not heard me speak before, business agility is a set of organizational capabilities, behaviors, and ways of working. Now, let's be clear. It's not the practices, it's not the processes, it's not the frameworks, and it's not agile. It's how you act. And we believe that if you behave with agility, you have agility. But it's these behaviors, capabilities, and ways of working that affords your business the freedom, the flexibility, and the resilience to achieve your purpose, to serve your customers. And then the magic 6 words, no matter what the future brings. That's it. That's business agility at the end of the day. Now, when we go deeper into this, we talk about the capabilities of business agility. Now, I said business agility is behaviors and capabilities, and there are behaviors underneath this. In our research, we have identified 84 behaviors. That's not the topic of this presentation, so we're not going to go and explore those in detail. But what I would like to highlight for you are the capabilities. And I like to think of, for example, going to the gym, exercise. There are very few people who go to the gym because they enjoy it. Most people go to the gym because of what the gym does for them, the new physical capabilities that they achieve, strength, speed, stamina, the ability to play with your daughter without running out of breath. The gym is not the goal. It's not what you're trying to do. It's what comes from it. And the same is true in terms of business agility. The goal are the capabilities that your organization needs to be able to establish. So, for example, organizations want to be able to act as one. They want to be able to seize emergent opportunities. They want to be able to deliver value sooner or realize people's potential. It's these capabilities that distinguish an agile organization from a non-agile organization. And there are 18 capabilities in total, grouped across 5 domains: engaged culture, responsive customer centricity, people-first leadership, flexible operations, and value-based delivery. Now, this talk is not a talk about business agility specifically, so I'm not going to go into the detail as to what all of these are. I share this because when we talk about how you measure change, how you measure uncertainty, we're going to be using these capabilities and these domains as a framing device. Right? So how do you measure culture? How do you measure governance and operations? How do you measure customer centricity? So when I'll often talk about organizational change and transformation, whether you're running a formal transformation or not. But ultimately, everyone here listening is, I would hope, doing something in the world of OKRs, measurements. And the point of measurements, very fundamentally, is to ensure that what your goals are is what you're working towards. And generally, those goals involve some level of change. The problem with that is the simplest thing to do is nothing. The simplest thing for anyone to do is what they've always done. Now, if all you're measuring is, are we doing the same thing we've always done, then great, right? But that's not the point of this talk. The point of this talk is to explore that the measuring uncertainty. What is different? So rather than status quo being the simplest thing to do, we want to make new the simplest thing to do. We want to make the new ways of working, the new ways of being easier than anything else that you're doing right now. Now, I could talk about how, but that's not the point. The point of this talk is to talk about how do we measure each of these things. So I'm going to give you some very specific examples and some very specific measures and OKRs that organizations that we work with have been using. And I'm going to start with the very first domain, those of engaged culture. Now, we've done a piece of work to look at and speak to our members and organizations that we study. Like I said, we've studied now over 2,000 organizations in various research studies. And when we look at how do these organizations measure cultural change, we get a list, and I've got a very, very long list. I've picked the top 4 that I wanted to highlight, and there's more besides that I can share. But the number 1 measure of an effective culture, and especially the capability act as one, is handoffs. The number of handoffs in the system that exist. Now, handoffs is a very interesting measure because handoffs, we want there to be as few handoffs between ideation to customer as possible. And the design and the intent of a agile structure, organizational structure, squads and tribes, perhaps you may be using, is to bring the number of times that work, that value gets moved between teams down to as low as possible. It's never going to be zero, right? But because we're talking about large, complex organizations, but certainly lower than it is today. And so we want to be measuring the number of handoffs in the system across every work, every value stream, every piece of work. Real example, before I started the Business Agility Institute, I was a consultant. And in that career, I have run 4 separate marketing transformations. So as in transforming marketing teams towards agile or business agility. Now, one of the common practices in transformation is what we call a value stream map. So we look at the value stream, the flow of work through the system. And in all 4 cases, these are different organizations, mostly different industries. 2 were financial services, 1 was heavy industry, and 1 was government. In all cases, what's called the process efficiency, right, which was the ratio between the time spent creating value and the time spent waiting, right? The process efficiency in all cases was less than 5%, which means that they were spending about 1 or 2 days. They were taking like 6 months to do 1 or 2, 3 or 4, 5 days worth of work. It was an extreme case of wait. And most of that was because of the number of handoffs. It would go from product to marketing, from the marketing manager to the campaign, from the campaign to creative, back to marketing, from there to data, back to marketing, from data to media, then back to marketing, then to audit, and back to, it was just bouncing between teams over and over again. And every time it handed off, it was sitting in someone else's queue and was waiting. And so they'd be running 20 or 30 different marketing campaigns simultaneously because they just had to wait. They kept waiting. Now, we're not going to talk about transformation, but the key was we brought that process efficiency down and got it down to a week's worth of work being done in 2 or 3 weeks, much better than 6 months. Measuring the number of KPIs that conflict, or this could be OKR, conflict index, so or KR, conflict interest. Where are those key results conflicting or blocking each other? Shared goals. What is the percentage of goals that are shared across business units, not so executives who have the same business goals? Because, and again, this comes to this conflict where my business goal is different to your business goal, even though we work for the same business. And then lastly, the time to access information. And this comes up a lot in, say, the capability to engage transparently and courageously, but in other cultural capabilities as well. So here we want to measure how long it takes a member of staff to find information that they need within the system. Now, obviously, the trend should be low. It should be towards 0. Information should be easy to access. Now, there is a lot more. There is decision communication time, or measures of employee belonging, or measures of dissent and disagreement. But when we look at cultural change, these are the sort of the top 4 that emerge. Now, the next capability is customer centricity. Now, with this one, we're looking at measures around how effectively does an organization engage with and respond to customers. Now, Again, there's a lot more than 4, but these are the top 4 that I wanted to share with you, the ones that I thought were most interesting, or most unique. My favorite being the degrees of separation. And this is the degrees of separation, or the average number of degrees of separation between any layer in the hierarchy and the person who engages with the customer. Now that should be as low as possible. It should be 0. Everyone from the CEO down to an individual contributor should have regular engagement with customers. But the reality is with most organizations, it's that front line that engages with the customer, and all of the insights from the customers go through 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers of hierarchy until a leader gets that information. And by the time it feeds through that many layers of hierarchy, that information is useless, or certainly less useful. So again, what we're looking for is organizations reducing the degrees of separation. Customer retention. Now, I didn't put customer satisfaction here, though that was definitely the most common. But customer retention is a much stronger correlation to your ability to fiercely champion the customer, your ability to sense and respond, than just their satisfaction scores. In large part, because satisfaction scores can be gamed, can be manipulated. I'm assuming everyone here is familiar with NPS. I don't have to describe it, but I have on multiple occasions been instructed by organizations how to respond. So I remember buying a car, oh God, I don't know, 15 years ago. And the car salesman basically saying, look, you're going to get a survey from head office. If you like what I did, please score me 9 and 10, because anything below a 9 doesn't count. Right? And it's like, did he give me a 9 out of 10 service? No, not really. Would I actually recommend him? I never did. I mean, he was fine, absolutely fine. Right? But would I recommend him to my friends? No, like he's a car salesman. And yet, of course, I'm going to give you, I want you to get your bonus. You're a nice guy. Sure, I'll give you a 9, not a problem. And this is before I knew what NPS was. This was like 15 odd years ago. But it's so easy to gain those customer satisfaction ratings. But customer retention is a much more, well, it's indirect. And it's impossible or very, very difficult to manipulate. Things like innovation funds, measuring how much you, how many, just a dollar amount as a percentage or as a real number that is allocated to support unplanned or emerging innovation ideas, things that don't have a guaranteed marker of success, things that like money that could be wasted. And most organizations, that's almost 0. And sensing cadence. How often do you actually sense and probe the market? Now, this should be real time, but for most organizations, it's not. Now, again, there's a lot more to this. There are things like scent farming or market share or customer conversations, but these are the 4 that I thought wanted to highlight. What about people first operation? People first leadership. These are the behaviors around your leaders. Now, again, organizations put a lot of money and effort into leadership development. And so what we want to see is how much time and energy do these organizations put into, how much success have they had from the time and energy they put in leadership development? So we're looking for things like approvals and escalations. This is my favorite. So in order for a decision to get made, how many times or how many layers does it have to go up to approve that decision? Now, the answer should be 0, because the team should have the authority to make their own decisions in the vast majority of cases. That's an entirely different conversation. I could spend 30 minutes talking just about that, right? But quite often, I remember being a consultant working for a large consulting firm, and my travel approval, and again, long conversation, but it would take, the governance processes to decide to approve my travel differed whether it was Q3 or Q4. In Q3, it was my boss who had to approve. And that alone could take like weeks and cost the organization money. A process designed to save money was costing them money. That's a different topic. But if it was Q4, it had to go to the country manager to approve, because of course they're trying to save money and all that kind of thing. So then we get like another layer, another level of escalation before that decision gets made. So we want to see those numbers go down close to zero. Employee retention, same as customer retention. Employee satisfaction, easy to game. Employee retention, you don't want it zero, by the way. You actually want some churn. If you have zero, it's static, it's stagnant. That's actually bad. But and it does differ between countries as well, countries and culture. Countries like India will have a much higher natural retention. So sorry, a much higher natural attrition, lower retention than say the US. I can't talk about Latin America, but we do want to see those numbers as close as they can. I've got about 5 minutes left, I think. So speeding up a little bit, because I want to talk about my favorite domain, flexible operations. So what is it that we want to measure when it comes to governance? So very simply, this domain looks at flexible operations, fund work dynamically, reorganize structures fluidly, balance governance and risk. So here we want measures around things like my favorites, speed to fund and speed to staff. How quickly can you move funds or people to an initiative? Now, especially one that's out of budget cycle. So let's say you have an annual budget, and that goes to budget cadence. We actually want to see that come down from annual. But let's say you do have an annual budget. If there's a new innovation, a new idea, something that the organization should do, how quickly can it be funded and how quickly can it get staffed? And in a lot of organizations, especially large organizations, that speed to funds could be measured in quarters, like many months. And speed to staff, just getting approval to hire can take 3 or 4 months, let alone the actual hiring process. Right? So we have all of these issues around how money and people flow through the organization. And we want to measure how effective we can be, how those speed to fund and speed to staff. The last one is that approval points. We see this a lot in terms of how approvals, who can make approvals. And this goes very much to the prior one around escalation points. But we want to reduce the number of approval points in the system. The last domain, that of value-based delivery. And I'm not going to spend much time here, but the one I really wanted to highlight was the lead time cycle time ratio. So lead time is the time from ideation to when work gets started. Cycle time is the time from when work is started to when work is completed. I misled you. Sorry, lead time is the time from ideation to work completed. Cycle time is from work started to work completed. What we actually want to see, interestingly, is this ratio go up. We actually want to see, in order to measure things like prioritization, like how effective are you at prioritization? That means we're doing fewer things simultaneously, which means we want cycle time to get shorter, right? Because we're working on less things simultaneously, so we can focus on a smaller number of things, but lead time should actually increase, right? Because things are sitting in the waiting queue for longer because fewer things are being worked on simultaneously. So this is one of those key measures. We actually want to see lead time increase while cycle time decreases, because that is a very effective measure of prioritization or effective prioritization. So to wrap this up, broadly speaking, what we are trying to change is how people work. And we're going to be using measures, operational like KPIs and OKRs, to measure the behavior that we want to see established across the organization. And it's those behavioral measures and those behavioral observations that create sustainable organizational change.